morning, good morning, good morning. It is 5:30 on a Friday morning. We are recording Friday morning. You know what that means. Nothing for about 12 more hours because I have to go to work. We're going to draw a toy from the toy box, a random object from the Random Object Randomogrifier, if you will. I just want to spritz these watercolors real quick, make sure they're nice and juicy for later. All right. Today's random object, I overspritzed. Today's random object is a toy diver, scuba diver, from the 50s and 60s era scuba diving. Oh, of course that camera. Man, I tell you what, we had gremlins abound yesterday, and we're having gremlins again this morning. And I tell you, it is, where is the scene? Scene transitions. It is funny to me because it's like the horoscope yesterday. Ivy was telling me that people were having, I can't even find my cameras. Why can't I find my cameras? Here we go, sources. Ivy was telling me that people were all kinds of people were having problems with their cameras yesterday, their streams yesterday. And I looked at the horoscope, and the horoscope said Mercury was in Uranus or something. I don't know. Overhead wide. Let's see this device. Nothing like technical difficulties, and there was no problem before we started streaming. I came down here early to make sure that there were no problems. Okay, I think I fixed it. Just needed to be. Okay, I think I fixed it. My goodness. So yeah, Mercury's in Uranus or something like that. I don't know. It's just crazy how the planetary alignment attacks people. I don't believe in any of that. You can tell I don't believe in any of that by my rudeness. Anyway, not to offend anybody who does believe in that. Today we have a scuba diver. This is a 50s or 60s era scuba diver. You can tell that because, oh, Ivy's in the chat. Hi, Ivy. You can tell that because there's no regulator, there's only one tank, there's no backup air supply, there's no scrubber, and he's got the full face mask with the rubber hood going over his whole head with the neck attachment coming down there. All of that stuff tells us this is a 50s and 60s era Johnny Quest type setup. Just going through the composition phase here real quick to make sure that everything I want to draw, everything I want to put on here is going to fit on here, and that I have put this in the right place. I don't think we're going to have any problems. This has a little more detail than your standard worm, but less detail than a spaceship. Ivy went to the hospital. So it should go fairly quickly, but still have some fun with it. We can come back in and start putting the details in now. Anyway, before there were divers, people have been diving for thousands of years, mostly for food. Mostly for food, because you could go down there and pick up the crustaceans and come back. People have been doing that for thousands of years, and they used to just hold their breath. There is a tribe of people, the Bahau people, that have been doing that for so long that their DNA has actually changed to give them a larger spleen. And the spleen is the part of the body that helps deliver oxygen to the bloodstream. And they have a larger spleen than the average human. And they are born with the ability to hold their breath up to 5 minutes. They have been living that lifestyle isolated for that long. It is genetic. It is something that, like I said, when they're born, they already have the enlarged spleen. But that is how people used to dive and have been diving for thousands of years. They couldn't, there's not a whole lot of things they could do. They couldn't go very deep. They couldn't go very far. That's all they could do. And then we start building ships. And when we started building ships, we started having stuff a little deeper, and we had to have reasons to go deeper. We had to have reasons, and when a ship was capsized, we had to have reasons to go. We had to have the ability to go get the stuff that fell off the ship, because maybe you had all of your livestock on that ship, so you had to have the ability to go get it. So we had people who could dive by holding their breath, but they invented diving bells. Big wooden bells or big metal bells that people would actually get inside, and they would weight them down and lower them to the bottom of the seafloor so they could pick stuff up off the seafloor. But it's pitch black in there. They couldn't see, because it's not like there were windows or a way to. They would try to light candles or lanterns and die, and they couldn't figure out why they were dying. Going back to our pirate days, there are death at sea stories the other day. I can see why they would think disturbing the dead sailors at the bottom of the sea might be the reason people were dying, because that's when they would do it. But they tried it, and it wasn't until the 1700s that they figured out, oh wait, we need air. They started giving them glass windows. When we developed glass, they started giving them glass windows so they could see, but it's still murky. But the bells were really restrictive. You could only deal with what was directly underneath your bell, or hold your breath. But it wasn't until the 1700s that they figured out, oh wait, you know what? Air. The problem is air. We need air to survive. Sweetie, what's the question? I don't know if Leonard Nimoy was a diver or not. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. But then they figured out they needed air, so they started figuring out ways to pump air into the bells. And then they made the bells into helmets and stuff so they could go around further with the air pumped down into it. And then in the 1800s, they figured out that it was not just oxygen that they had to have. They figured out that they had to scrub the CO2. And so by the 1800s, they had all the information they needed to develop what they called iron lungs and diving bell suits. It didn't happen overnight. But Jules Verne took that information and wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, predicting the type of diving equipment we have now. And what I really think is interesting about that is the person who actually invented scuba gear, but he called it an aqualung, was Jacques Cousteau. And he was inspired by Jules Verne. So it's almost like the thing invented itself. He fully admits that he was inspired by Jules Verne. But at the same time, that would have been the 40s, and Jacques Cousteau was in occupied France, and so the technology was behind the German wall, if you will. And so the rest of the world couldn't adopt it. If they were even aware of it, they couldn't adopt it, so they couldn't use it. At the same time, there was a fellow by the name of Lambertson who was developing a rebreather. Jacques Cousteau's was an aqualung that had a bivalve that let your exhale air out into the water. Lambertson's had a recycler and a scrubber that had no bubbles. And the military likes that better because it's more stealthy. And to this day, they use both. They use the aqualung type that Cousteau developed, and they use the Lambertson's rebreather device for stealth missions. But they call it all SCUBA, which stands for self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. How are we doing on time? Oh, it's 5:45 already. There's another science fiction inspired development with James Bond, where Google says so. So who am I thinking of? Hang on, wait a minute. The chat's gone crazy. It's on my brain. She asked if Leonard Nimoy was a diver, and then this is Ivy, Dee Phoenix. It's been on my brain that he was, but I thought I'd ask here before I Googled it. Google says so. Google says no, so who am I thinking of? If anyone would know a fun fact like that, it would definitely be him. She says, right? That's why I trust him. That's why I trust asking him over at Google. You would think that would come up in my search, in my research for this kind of stuff, but no, that one didn't come up. Whether or not Leonard Nimoy was a diver. So James Bond, Roger Moore. I think it was Roger Moore. I remember it being Roger Moore, but y'all correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But I think it was Roger Moore. Crashes a party by pulling a device out of his pocket, a small mouthpiece, and putting it in his mouth. I think that's probably why they call it a mouthpiece. Putting it in his mouth and being able to breathe underwater. And the Soviets saw this and believed that we had such a device. And so they were trying to reverse engineer it. They were not successful, mostly because it was made up. But that didn't stop them from trying, and that's important. But the interesting thing is, you fast forward a few years, and you've got them trying to make what they call a rebreather that actually pulls air out of the ocean. Actually pulls oxygen out of the ocean. But it has a couple of problems. One, it takes a lot of energy to pull oxygen out of the water. So that's obviously an issue. And two, when it does so, there are big pockets of hydrogen, H2, nearby, and that is very poisonous and explosive. So that's a no-go. And then finally, there's no way to pull the CO2 out. Even when they manage to get the oxygen, they can't get rid of the CO2. And CO2, as we discovered in the 1800s, is worse. It actually doesn't take very much oxygen to keep us going, but a little bit. It also doesn't take very much CO2 to poison us. So that is the bigger struggle, is getting rid of the CO2. But they're working on it, and it's not that different than what James Bond had. So there's another instance of fiction driving fiction driving scientific advancement reality. I'm sure Ian Fleming would be super excited about that idea. That his stories about James Bond might have inspired new technology. Can't talk, Arding. I'll give you another one that's fun, though. The Abyss with Ed Harris. They go deep. Their oil platform sinks. And they go deep into the ocean. And a piece of what they need sinks below into the... what do they call it? That big canyon at the bottom of the ocean. Man, I knew it right before I started talking about it. Don't grow old. Growing old makes you... yeah, there's something... there's a name for that trench, though. My daughter's in my ears. Yeah, that one. So, apparently, the Marianas Trench, apparently, they're... something that they need to save themselves sinks into the Marianas Trench. And humans can't dive that deep. The deepest human dive, even in a pressurized suit is only 2,000 feet. And that record was in 78, I think. And it still stands simply because nobody does that anymore. But they couldn't just dive down because there's no technology to do that. So he gets into this pressurized suit and fills the suit with oxygenated perfluorocarbons. And what those things do is allow your lungs to fill with water, liquid, not actually water, liquid, and it keeps you from blowing up under the water. The heavy pressure of the waves, the heavy pressure of the ocean water above you, can't crush you because you're full of liquid now instead of air, instead of compressible gas. Let me dry this real quick. Give me just a second. Yeah. All right. So anyway, back to my story. They fill his lungs with perfluorocarbons, highly oxygenated perfluorocarbons, to keep him from being compressed under the weight of the ocean, of the seawater. And he goes down under the water. I'm not going to tell you what he finds down there, because it's pretty amazing what they do with that movie. But I wanted to tell you about the perfluorocarbons, because that is also real technology. The difference is that that technology was, they were experimenting with that technology when James Cameron decided to introduce that into the movie. That was technology they were actually already working with. And they were having lab rats breathe in the perfluorocarbons, and then they were pressurizing the tank that the lab rats were in, and they could go to very extreme depths without incident. And it was promising technology for its time. They used it with preemies with underdeveloped lungs in the early 90s. They were developing the technology for them, and it helped them. It saved their lives, but it also caused some infections that they wouldn't get. And the issues that they discovered were that it wasn't scrubbing the CO2 out. It was working to get them oxygen into their tiny little lungs that couldn't do gas exchange very well. But it still wouldn't scrub away the CO2. So they actually developed steroids that made the lungs work better. And that technology was cheaper and more effective with fewer infections. So they abandoned the perfluorocarbon technology, but it is an interesting footnote in diving history. They tried it with adult humans, and if you can imagine, they said, here, we're going to put you in this suit filled with liquid, and we just want you to breathe normally. And I want you to try to imagine sucking in your bath water without panicking. And, you know, drowning is considered one of the absolute worst ways to die. I just can't imagine willfully trying to suck in trying to suck a liquid into my lungs. So I can see why that technology might have failed. I can fully comprehend how that technology failed. So basically, we're still using the same technology. We have better valves and we have better tanks and lighter equipment, but basically we're still using the same exact technology that Jules Verne designed in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and that Jacques Cousteau realized in the 1940s, and that Lambertson developed in the 1940s. We're still using basically the exact same technology from those times, because there's been no real advancement since then. Basically, it's just a way to get air to the bottom of the ocean so that we can take a look around and see some of the most beautiful sights, see some of the most amazing things, like the caves that you can only get to by cave diving. And cave diving is a special challenge because it is so easy to be blinded and disoriented under the water that you know, they have to tie ropes to give them a guy line back out of the water, out of the cave. People get trapped. There's a cave in Florida where people have been, so many people have died in that cave. Just getting lost and disoriented. Sometimes people die within 10 feet of the opening of the cave just because they're so disoriented and they run out of air and they can't get out. It's tragic. It's really tragic. But the cave, that one cave in Florida is, they call it the Mount Everest under the sea because of how many people have challenged themselves to swim in it and then don't make it out. Hi, Claudia. Watching us on her way to work. But they don't make it out of that cave. What is today, the 27th? But there's pictures of the inside of those caves, and they managed to get some lights inside of those caves and set up permanent tourism. And some of them are just beautiful. They look like cathedrals, underwater cathedrals, with all the stalagmites and stalactites underneath. Some of them go miles inland, and there's pockets of air inside. You can take your stuff off and breathe, but the only way to actually access the cave is by diving underwater. I like the story of the vampires. That's the perfect place for vampires to live, is in those caves or cities on the ocean floor. Vampires don't need air, and they need to be away from sunlight. They could have whole cities underneath there, and that could be the reason why there's so many cave diving deaths. It's not because they ran out of air, it's because they found the vampires. So there is today's diver. Let's see it. Let me turn my overhead camera off here and disconnect it, and then I can show you what it looks like from my perspective. There, that's more like it. Turn that off. Go to that, and you can see it there. So that's what I did today with the SCUBA Diver. Tomorrow, the little girl has already pulled out a new toy for us. Let's see what that is. We have, it's a dragon. No, it's not a dragon. It's a, oh good lord, that's tiny print. Dracosaurus? Yeah, this is a Dracosaurus from, or Dracosaurus, because it looks like a dragon. They call it a Dracosaurus from Safari. So this is what we'll be doing tomorrow. That one's quite detailed. Perfect for a Saturday morning when I don't have to worry about going to work. But if you're watching this Saturday morning on the 28th before 5:30 in the morning, that means this is the trailer and we're about to do this. So stick around. But as it is 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:05. Oh my goodness, and I have to get ready for work. So guys, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. Keeps me and my art practice accountable, and I get to art with my art buddies. So be sure and tune in tomorrow. Same Artistic Biker time, same Artistic Biker channel, and we dance. We dance until someone tells me to take my mic off, because that is how we know that the lag has come.